Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much. Uh, I am Sam Javaharpour, and it's a pleasure actually to have the chance to present here. And yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Doe, for the invitation. Should we start now?
Sure, let's start. You got audience in place and online too, so good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so my name is Sam Javaharpour. I have a PhD in computational media design from the University of Calgary. I have a background in architecture. Last year, I completed a postdoc fellowship at the National Institute for Research in Digital Science and Technology of France, also known as INRIA. And then I worked with Dr. Yvonne Janssen and Dr. Pierre Dragicevic there. These days, I do computational design and research on immersive visualizations at Kirkor Architects here in Toronto, Canada. So in today's lecture, I actually want to talk about digitally fabricating reality, computational design approaches in geospatial data physicalization. So with that, we can, I guess, jump into the presentation. So as I mentioned, I am an architect, and before becoming a computational designer and a researcher, I was mostly working in the field of architecture. But among all the projects that I worked on, this energy park that I'm showing here was the one that for the first time actually challenged me to combine concepts of visualizations like showing a volcano or different layers of the earth in an architectural space. So that was a really interesting experience. And here, actually, I started to thinking about doing research in an interdisciplinary field. And then I was lucky to find the computational media design program at the University of Calgary. After joining the University of Calgary, I actually joined the graphics lab. And what they were doing was pure complicated computer graphics stuff related to discretization of the globe, assigning data to all these discretized parts of the globe, and the complicated math behind it. They called this program a digital Earth, and it was the core research of the lab that I was part of. So at the very first point, I learned that geospatial data is complex, and petabytes of data are being produced on a daily basis from various data capturing technologies and even from smartphones that we carry around in our pockets. So for every region in the Earth, there are many layers of data with very detailed information that in order to be understood and analyzed, they actually need to be combined in a system and integrated in a system, such as a GIS system or a digital Earth system. But just combining these data sets and integrating them is not enough. Those data sets need to be visualized to be better understood and analyzed. So one way, as we all know, is a virtual visualization or an on-a-screen visualization. That sort of visualization for geospatial data can be at the scale of a country, at the scale of a city, or a landscape or a national park, let's say. But my question was, how is it possible to put all this complicated graphics stuff into an interdisciplinary research? One possible solution can be a field called physicalization or data physicalization. So physicalization is a physical artifact whose geometry or material properties encode data. For example, in this physicalization, the world's population density is shown through the heights of all those individual extruded cells. Physicalizations actually improve the efficiency of information retrieval and memorability of data when compared to their on-screen counterparts. Physicalizations inherit all the practical and social advantages of everyday objects. They can be explored through touch, they can be carried around, they can be possessed, and they can be directly manipulated. So the question is how to apply such characteristics to geospatial data, as dealing with geospatial data, as I mentioned, was the main part of the research lab. So to elaborate, the goal is to be able to get large-scale geospatial data or small-scale geospatial data, give it to a framework, and make physicalizations for large areas, physicalizations for small areas, or even physicalizations as architectural spaces. So let's call this framework GeoPhys. With that said, we want to use GeoPhys to make physicalizations that are scalable, are interactive, and we want the whole process to be repeatable. So regardless of the desired scale of the final physicalization, our methodology consists of data transformation, digital design, digital fabrication, and evaluation. And finally, we can introduce the final framework. We call this whole process the GeoPhys pipeline, which is a physical rendering process for GeoPhys. The physical rendering process, or rendering, makes the visual presentation perceivable by bringing it into existence in the physical world. Rendering in the scope of this work talks about the digital design, digital fabrication, and the back and forth process between these two and their challenges. So, such physical rendering process actually requires an interdisciplinary understanding of computer graphics, visualization, design, fabrication, and HCI. Okay, as I mentioned, one of the goals was to use GeoPhys for large areas. In fact, we want to see how it is possible to make a portion of the Earth as a physical model and also have different layers of data and physically overlay these datasets. And for doing this research, we want to use an affordable 3D printer, a 3D printer like this one, which has the built area of 8 by 9 by 8 inches. So this 3D printer is only limited to 1 or 2 color, maybe if you get a 2 extruder one. So it can produce something like this globe that I'm showing here, which is a small, and it doesn't have many details, and it's unable to show the desired region and the desired data sets. But what we wanted to do was to be able to get a portion of the globe and a set of desired data sets, give it to our framework, to our GeoPhys, and make a physical model like this one. So the question here is how to select the exact region of interest and how to match the desired dataset with that exact region. Also, how to fabricate it with an appropriate scale, which needs the appropriate discretization of the whole model so that we can 3D print that into different sessions. So we proposed to use a discretized global grid system, or a DGGS. But what is a DGGS? So a DGGS actually discretizes the globe into separate tiny pieces at multiple resolutions, and those pieces are used to assign and also to retrieve data from them. For our system, a DGGS provides a multi-resolution representation, and also it gives us the cell geometry that we need and also the data which is associated to that. It gives us the discretization, as I mentioned, and also it gives us the indexing that we need for the assembly purposes of the 3D printed objects. The specific DGGS that we use for a system is a truncated icosahedron, which has 12 pentagons and 20 hexagons. So what we do with that DGGS-based data retrieval is that we get the different data sets that we need, and we match the geometry of those data sets with the cells that we have. Now we can start 3D printing different layers. But for 3D printing, we need some fabrication details. So we get the initial geometry from the DGGS and the digital Earth model that we have. And then our system designs all the fabrication details that we need, such as a series of details for having the thickness that is required, the data attachment pieces, labeling pieces, and attachment of the physical objects. After 3D printing the pieces, we can have the model made and used for data overlay. So to overview this, what we did was that we got a portion of the globe that we wanted. We got a set of desired data sets, and we did the discretization of that portion. We matched the geometry of those cells with the geometry of the DGGS cells. This DGGS is a tongue twist. So then we added the details that we needed for fabrication and assembly, and then 3D printed all the pieces and made the model and made the layers and had the final physical model. Here are some examples of the results that we are showing here. Here we 3D printed part of Western Canada and Northwestern United States. And we are showing different data sets like the Canadian fire data set, Canadian National Fire data set, or the temperature data, and also the overlay of these two layers, and also a 3D printed layer that shows elevation data. The model that we had also supports some interactions, like we can attach a transparent layer of to the data and sketch on top of that, or we can use pins and wires to show vector data. Okay, so going back to our goals, we also wanted to do physicalizations for small scales. So in fact, we want to see if it is possible to 3D print a place like this with a 3D printer that I just showed. So here we introduced the geophys for small areas. Again, going back to the same 3D printer that we had, an affordable 3D printer with a built area of 8 by 9 by 8 inches. It can produce a landscape model like this, which is small, it has single color, it doesn't have many details, and it's not what we want, right? So what we want to do is that we want to be able to get the elevation data that we need, and also the vector data of different features of the region that we choose, give it to the framework, give it to geophys, and make the final physical model. So one important characteristic of making such models is adding features. So for adding features, what we propose is that we propose to use different layers. If we 3D print the model in different layers, then we will be able to use different materials and different colors. Then the next part is elevation and features. So what we do is that we get the elevation data, we add the vector data that has the features to the elevation data, and we make the sub meshes from those features. Digital elevation, actually the elevation data can be found as many different at many different sources that provide digital elevation models. Similar to the physicalization for large areas, here we also need to do segmentation. So we need to break the model into small pieces. Here we have two goals. One, we want to minimize the number of pieces because we don't want to end up 3D printing many layers and pieces. And also, we want to avoid small pieces. So with these two goals, we need to design the segmentation process. For this part of the design, we design the algorithm in a way that it moves the model into separate iterations. It actually rotates the model and moves the model on a grid, which is designed based on the 3D printed size of the 3D printer. And then it gives us the final place that we need to put the model. On the final place, all the two goals that I mentioned can be achieved. So after this, there's another important part which is related to physicalizations at this scales, which is feature design. We need to show vegetations, and color itself is not enough. We need to design details that enable us to show different features such as vegetations or pathways. For vegetation design, the input data that we have only gives us the boundary of the vegetation area. And we also face the printer limitations. For example, we cannot 3D print individual trees. So what we ended up doing was that we populated the vegetation area with tree models. And by populating, we actually created variations in size, variations in shape, and the distribution of trees. And here are some examples that we produced with our system to show scattered trees, pine trees, or tropical rainforest trees. To generate a natural distribution of trees, we use a simulation method that works based on two rules. One is self-thinning, and two, it's senescence. So here, the radius of circles actually shows the age of trees. Another important feature for making physicalizations at this scale, as I mentioned, is pathways. So pathway actually contains roads, trails, or water bodies. Raw data that we get from the system is just a set of points. So what we do for this is that we connect those into one polyline, and then we apply an offsetting value so that we will be able to 3D print the pathways that we need. And once we have that, we can 3D print them and make our pathways. Another critical feature in for physicalizations at this scale is actually the built environment, or let's say buildings. There are challenges related to buildings. One is assembly. So we cannot 3D print individual buildings and then start assembling them. So what we did was that we introduced stencil layers. We put a group of different buildings into one stencil layer, and then 3D printed that layer, and also another layer that 3D print that was used to 3D print pathways, another layer to 3D print vegetations. And by assembling these layers, we can make the physical piece that we needed to have all those features shown on it. Sometimes there are elevation changes on the models that doesn't make it possible to 3D print it, like naively 3D print a whole cube of land that has the elevation changes. It just doesn't make sense. So in order to tackle this, we introduced the use of pillars. So for the pillars, we use the top surface of the geometry at the intersection of four pieces that we are going to assemble, and use that geometry to make the pillar design. And we also add a notch on top of the pillar so that it makes it easier for us to assemble the pieces. If it is needed by the fabrication shortcomings or fabrication sizes that we are facing, we can break those pillars into different segments. And we also use an alphanumeric reference so that we can go and find those once we want to start the assembly process. So to review the process, what we did at this scale was that we got the vector data that we needed, and based on that, we made a triangulated mesh. We also got the elevation data from different sources that we had, and combined the elevation data with the triangulated mesh. We then made the feature submeshes and made the extruded layers. Now, when we have the extruded layers, we apply the segmentation algorithm and make all the separate pieces. Once all these pieces are 3D printed, we can assemble them and have the final physical model. So going back to the image that I showed earlier, which was the Lauterbrunnen Valley in Switzerland, as a proof of concept, we wanted to see how we can 3D print this. So this valley is really interesting because it has many interesting features. And also it has a very interesting elevation model. The mountains at both each side of the valley actually rise more than 2,300 feet, which makes it really interesting and challenging for 3D printing them. We start the assembly process by assembling the pillars that I mentioned for holding the model, and then we add the top surface of that, and then we start adding all the separate layers of different features. So once we have all the features 3D printed, we can start the assembly process. All right. So when the model is assembled, we will have a result like this, which is made with that small 3D printer. And here is a close-up of some of the details like vegetations, buildings, pathways, water bodies. And it shows how the system actually handled all those details. And this is a collage of the 3D printed model with a 3D view from Google Earth and its elevation data. Okay, so going back to our goals, a question that we wanted to answer was how it is possible to apply geophys to architectural spaces. In fact, we actually wanted to explore and see if it's possible to make a pavilion like this, that is, one, designed with data, and two, represents the data or visualizes the data once it is built and it is made. So if we dig into the literature, we will find another branch of data physicalizations, which is called data spatialization. So spatializations are actually informative spaces that are created to show data. Some examples, some great examples of actually data specializations are the Centennial Chromograph by Adam Marcus and the Data Moray project by Alvin Wong. So these are great projects, but what happens in these projects is that the data is actually only used for the design process. Once the whole pavilion or the whole spatialization or the whole architectural space is built, you cannot read the data anymore. So that data sort of turned mute in the final representation. But the goal for our framework was to make something that also represents the data once it is built. To tackle this issue, we worked on a method based on catoptric or mirror-based design. So we started the whole process by having an input image, an input shape, let's say, and a privileged point and a cylindrical mirror. What we did was that we just started casting rays from the privileged point to the input shape and just got the points on the mirror. Then we calculated the reflections, and by interpolation of the reflections, we made the distorted shape. Now that you have this distorted shape, if you look at the mirror from the privileged point, you will see the exact initial input shape. So it's sort of a reverse engineering method of the catoptric design. We then actually worked on the algorithm and made it in a way that it can take various type of data sets, like it can get shapes or images at input data to start working on the design of this pavilion. For the preliminary design, as I mentioned, we started from an image input and saw how we can use an image input and make it distorted so that we can see the results on the mirror. And then we started working on adding an extrusion factor to different pieces, different segments of the image based on the brightness values. So as you can see here, the one on the left is actually showing the virtual model, and the one on the right is the 3D printed version of the model. So once we apply the extrusion factors, it just gives us an object, which seems to be a random object. But when you look at it and closer and you understand where to look at it from, you will see the underlying image or data that it is trying to show. So applying the same methodology to the mirror-based work, we can make something like this. So it is a shape, it is a piece, but then once you look at it from the mirror, you will see what exactly it is trying to show you. Here we also introduced the possibility of illuminating the end points of all those brick-like elements with RGB colors. So once we do that, we can actually show color on the reflected result as well. And this is a real 3D printed version of this preliminary design that I mentioned. So let's go back to the pavilion designs. For the pavilion design, we got various data sets for Canada and the United States from, again, the digital Earth model that we had. We got elevation data, precipitation, temperature, and population data. We tried to use some data sets that are environmental data sets, so that by making a space, the goal was to show some sort of environmental conditions and make awareness for people who are going to explore that space. So after this, we started the design process of the pavilion. The design process actually works based on the algorithm that I just introduced, but also it starts from the initial design of the pavilion in a way that you want the space to architecturally look like, and then you can calculate the locus of the data, the reflected data to that. And then those extruded layers that I mentioned, we can use those to create some brick-like patterns. For these brick-like patterns for this pavilion, we used elevation data, because through different layers of data or different data sets that we have, elevation data is a data that doesn't change through time. So once we have the elevation data, it can work as a base for us. It can create the shape, and it also works as a base. And we can, by that RGB colors and that illumination, we can show different layers of data. Unfortunately, we didn't have the chance to actually build this pavilion, so it's just 3D models, but the ending result will look similar to this. And here I have a video of that. If it plays, it shows how you can actually approach the model and how different data sets actually work. So once you want to approach the model, you will see a distorted shape, different layers, colors and illuminations, which just makes you curious to go and explore the model. But once you go and walk inside the pavilion, you understand that there is a message being shown to you. Temperature data, for example, on this one is being shown, and then it can change to elevation data. It can go back to precipitation data or population data. And since we have the base, we can update this visualization and show different data sets as we need them to be shown. And here is a comparison between the data set that we retrieved from the digital Earth model, and the middle row actually shows how it is being shown on the mirror, and the bottom one shows how people see it in the real environment. So actually the goal was achieved. We used the data for the design process, and we also were able to maintain the readability of the data. Okay, this meeting is being transcribed. Okay. So let's go back to the pipeline. As I mentioned in the GeoFees pipeline, there was a final piece which was related to evaluations and user studies. So one method for evaluation can be practical applications. I'm not going to go through the details of the user study that we had for this, just quickly mentioning it. So for this practical application of GeoFees, we thought of doing it as using it as an educational tool. And we actually did a collaborative research with Mount Royal University in Calgary, and we 3D printed another physical model of Eastern Australia, and sent it to Australia, Brisbane, to use it as an educational tool in geography for high school students. So the goal was to see how this model can help students to improve their understanding of geography concepts, data concepts, and data overlay concepts. So we asked some questions like, how did the students learn about overlay with the model? What was the students' experience using the model? And how well suited are the models for K-12 classrooms? We had 68 students. Most of them were females, and all students were in geography classes, and their teachers were trained geography educators. So we did some task analyzing, some data analyzing tasks with the students. We asked them to show us certain conditions. We just gave them, like, for example, elevation model, and asked them to compare the elevation model of Canada and Australia, or the precipitation model of Canada and Australia. Or we asked them to show us how the water would flow based on the elevation. We just wanted to see how they can understand this. And then we did some overlay tasks like overlaying elevation and temperature, and asked them to give us the connection that is there between elevation and temperature and stuff like this. One important theme that actually students described was that the model was fun, and it was very interesting because geography in high school is not typically a fun subject for students, but they actually liked it, and they mentioned that they learned more. They learned more through using these models. This model just proved to be beneficial in one application that we tried it for. And based on that, we just had an idea of using the idea of physicalizations for another learning tool application. This learning tool application was a traditionally challenging topic, which is called the sea ice travel by Inuit. So a little bit of background. Inuit are the indigenous people of the Arctic, and the word Inuit actually means the people in the Inuktitut language. They live in the Arctic and subarctic regions of Greenland, Labrador, Quebec, Nunavut and Northwest Territories, and Alaska. But mostly they live throughout northern Canada in the territory of Nunavut, 70,000 people. So the residents of the Arctic actually rely on sea ice travel for their transportation and livelihood, and they use their traditional knowledge for doing that. But climate change has actually made it increasingly dangerous for them to actually find the path that they need to choose and do their travels. Many of them actually end up falling into ice and losing their lives because of this. So to tackle this issue, they are trying to use technology. And one technology that can help them is radar imagery. So they are trying to use radar imagery to tackle this issue. But there is a little bit of challenge here. And that challenge is understanding the radar imagery and how the interpretation of that works. So in a radar image, a radar imagery actually is different from what we see and like a photo. This is a comparison of radar imagery and the actual image. In a radar image, smooth ice is black, but from what we see, it's pure white. In contrast, white portions of radar imagery are actually the roughest conditions of the ice. So there's a little bit of challenge happening every time here to understand that. And here's a comparison of these two. In Northern Canada, there is a multi-year educational program which is called Smart Ice. They are trying to train Inuit to use technology. And actually, they want to augment their traditional knowledge of the ice with technology. So they are doing their best, and they have all the equipment, and they travel there, and they try to have all these sessions that they understand how to interact with data and how to understand it, how to read it. But the interpretation issue still exists. So actually, what needs to be done is that a competency needs to be developed in order for Inuit to be able to understand radar imagery. So there needs to be an education. One solution would be using image processing solutions and converting the radar imagery to some, through some custom designed filters so that it is similar to a realistic photo. But the problem with doing so is that this transformation needs to happen every time they see a radar imagery. So and it needs to happen on the fly because they have devices and they just use them. They see the image in a live format, and they want to decide about their path of travel. So this needs to be done every time. And then the goal of actually the Smart Eyes program is to educate them and to teach them how to understand it and be confident in using this technology. And if we want to do that, the educational impact will be lost. So we try to use what we actually learned from the past and design an interactive tactile physicalization tool. So we wanted to use this time radar imagery and the framework, the geophys, to make physical models that novice interpreters actually can use and understand how the radar imagery would work. And once they have an understanding of that, it will just stick with them. And then from there on, they could be able to use the radar imagery for their interpretation purposes. So I'm not going through the methodology details of this that much, but basically what we did for the design was that we designed a roughness, let's say, a roughness pattern. And for designing that roughness pattern, we actually calculated the roughness of individual cells of a model and try to apply that into the roughness value. And we just, from what we learned from the study in Australia, we just needed to be careful and design it in a way that the roughness pattern is not misinterpreted as elevation. So what we ended up doing was actually using a roughness pattern like this, and we 3D printed some results. We only did a preliminary study session, some preliminary feedback from some Inuit interpreters. So we actually had 5 participants who worked with this model. So they had the radar imagery and they had the physical model. So they were just looking at both. They were trying to understand how it works. And the preliminary feedback that actually we received was really promising. They already knew the concept of radar imagery and how it worked, but they all told us that their understanding was improved and their interpretation actually was improved. Now they told us that they understand how this technology works better once that they just worked with the physical model. So we are planning to work on different scenarios of the design and do a formal study and see how it works and how things need to be improved. But it's always challenging to have everything set up, having to work with the smart eyes and going to Nunavut to do this studies and stuff like that. And so it's a little bit, it has been a little bit on hold, but hopefully it'll start again. So for concluding remarks of this lecture, in this lecture, I introduced a framework through the exploration of multiple visualization scenarios at the intersection of architecture, visualization, HCI, graphics, and fabrication. This work actually shows how the process of making geospatial visualizations can be unified into a single framework for understanding and processing geospatial data, for designing physicalizations and transforming digital forms into physical models, and for improving the sense of awareness about environmental issues for the general public by making engaging architectural space. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
So it would seem in your work that your DEMs or TINs are adjusted, exaggerated in some way, because if you get at some scales, you're not going to see much change. So it does this DGGS, does it have an automated way of doing that exaggeration?
For the landscape model, for the Lauterbrunnen Valley, actually the digital elevation models were not exaggerated. So the exact same scale. So I guess it was 1/2000. I don't know. I know that in the United States it's referred to in a different way, but in a metric it was 1/2000, if I'm not mistaken. But then the 3D printed version that we had was actually showing the exact scale of the exact data. The only exaggeration that we did was for one of those 3D printed pieces that I showed on the curved physical globe as sort of the attachment techniques that we can use. That was exaggerated, and that was not that exaggeration was something that we manually did an input to our system, to our algorithm, to be able to better show the elevation change. We actually wanted to exaggerate that because the piece was so small in the scale of 1/1,000,000 or something. And if we didn't do that exaggeration, it wouldn't make sense actually. But the DGGS actually gives you the exact elevation data. It's not exaggerated or elevated.
And do you see the applications of more a schematic look like that, where you do exaggerate, even though it's intended to be a geospatial model, that you would exaggerate to emphasize for understanding versus, I mean, that's what you're doing at the scale of the globe.
Yes.
But there might even be more localized things where you might exaggerate some portion of it to make it better understood of what you're trying to communicate.
That's actually a very interesting point. I don't have an application of that off the top of my head, but for sure it can be used for again for educational purposes or for making people aware of many different scenarios. So that exaggeration can be used in those scenarios, but I can't think of any specific application right now, because on the landscape model, so the goal was to make the exact replica of reality at the scale that we needed it to be. But I guess when it comes to other type of data sets, like if it's environmental pollutions or stuff like that, I mean, we can never feel guilty if we exaggerate environmental pollutions or global warming and exaggerate those data sets in order to have people more aware of what is going on and what is happening. So probably in scenarios like that, we can use that. David, I guess you have a question.
Yes, thanks. Really enjoyed the presentation. Fantastic stuff. Do you have any ideas for handling changes in map features or topography, such as, like, you know, cities are always building new roads, things like that, or there are major landslides that happen? So can your system that you've built like handle only replacing like one given tile in many tiles that you have to print for your
Yeah, so the fact
outcomes?
that the whole system, it's actually a very interesting point. The fact that the whole system is modular and all the pieces are printed separately, it makes it easier to remove one piece and replace it later. And that is actually something that can happen in scenarios like the city of Toronto, for example. They are massive development applications are happening on an annual basis. So you can have a 3D printed model of the downtown Toronto in all those different segments. And once a new development application is introduced, you can just replace that module and put something else back into it. That works in terms of the data that changes over time. But other than that, if we don't want to think of those massive changes, if we want to just think of some changes that happen over time, or landslides or things like that, something that we always thought about was that we can always use these physical models as a basis, as a physical base, and then we can do augmentation. Augmented reality actually gives us a better opportunity to do the overlay that we want to happen. If we want to show live data changing over time or stuff like that, or changes that has happened to the model. So probably augmented reality is just something that comes into play and completes the application of these models.
That's great. That's super interesting as well that you're considering augmented reality. I've got a ton of other questions, but I'll just ask one more now. So far I've been showing like features which are like area based, let's say. Do you have strategies for handling point features that are literally just a dot on the map? Do you like explode those into areas, or then maybe there's some other technique for representing individual points? Individual points on the map, or what type of? Yeah, so for example, if you have like particular landmarks that you would label within a map, and that would be just a single point as opposed to defining like a polygon.
Yeah, and then you want to show it on the global scale. On the global scale, I guess it won't be.
This would be small scale. Yeah. This would be more small scale.
Yeah, landmarks. It's very interesting because if we want to show landmarks, then we need to introduce a new feature It's a very good question. My thinking always goes back to augmented reality because you know,
Really?
we can just put that specific landmark there, and you know, because it's a point, right? And a point cannot be 3D printed, but once you just augment that scene, you know, when you look at it from your tablet and see, oh, there is something here happening, and then the data related to that can be shown, which is really interesting. But 3D printing that individual piece, I guess, unless we introduce something, you know, we model something specifically for that landmark and put it there, if it's something very important, that exaggeration that we were discussing can happen here again, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have a question about why you chose the amphitheater like geometry in the pavilion case. And it was like maybe also like why physicalization is important in that in that case study. I think particularly because so it seems like you want people to visualize the data on the mirror. And then you want people to go to the physical model to interact with them. And then the physical model is kind of a distorted model, or is like distorted from as well, like people's maybe like mental model of this like actual geometry is. So why not use something that's more like what you did with like the other project? Where if it's the sea that's planar, or like why not just use a screen to visualize the data?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Very interesting point. So as I mentioned, for the application of the architectural space, there was one goal, and the goal was to be able to create an architectural space that we want to create. So let's say a designer, an architect wants to do something, wants to design a pavilion. So there needs to be a geometry which is attractive, which works for different scenarios, for environmental purposes, for different, I don't know, wind or light or stuff like that, that comes into play when you want to do something related to architecture. So because of that, we actually wanted to have the freedom for the designer to design whatever they wanted to do. So they can design whatever they want. And then using data is part of the design process. In contrast, if we want to just put a physical map of, let's say, United States and Canada there physically, yeah, it works for the purposes of data physicalization and data visualizations, raising awareness and stuff like that. But then the architectural design aspect of that will be lost. Also, when we did the distorted geometry, it just gives us the opportunity so that people will be attracted to that, because it raises curiosity. You see a distorted geometry in the middle of an urban area, so it raises curiosity to go there and to explore it. Rather, if we just want to show a 3D map of a country, probably less people will be attracted to that. But here, they see a distorted geometry, they see a mirror, and in the mirror, everything is distorted. They themselves are distorted. The city is distorted, so they go there, they start exploring what is happening. And then they understand that, oh, this is the goal. When they just come in front of the mirror, they see the data and they understand that something is being visualized. So this was the intention of doing the distortion and then having the data.
With the Inuit, you had the Inuit interpreters. They were actually touching and feeling. Did you have any other people who had limited sight or had more kinesthetic learning techniques that you've introduced these kinds of models to?
For the Inuit project, as I mentioned, it was just a preliminary study. So we just had a chance to use this model once in one session in, I don't remember the name of the location, but it was in Nunavut. And we had 5 people only using the model. We just wanted to have a preliminary feedback. So it was just using the model as shown, and it sort of stopped there. we are waiting for it. As I mentioned, we are waiting for the next time that we can physically go there and we can have new designs introduced, new methods for showing roughness. And also we were thinking again of the application of immersive visualizations like physical models and augmented reality or virtual reality for the training sessions, because the goal, as I mentioned, was to have them see the data and the physical model side by side, being able to compare it and understand what is exactly happening and which is which. I mean, which part is which and what is how that interpretation works. So these are all left for the future steps of the project.
But in your other models, there was no quote visualization for people who had limited sight going and feeling the model and understanding, say, Switzerland, this area or something like that.
It was not designed specifically for those scenarios, but since it's physical, I mean, the fact that it's physical, it has this embedded into that. So if you want to, someone who has vision problems, if you talk to them about Lauterbrunnen Valley and describe it, then you give them the physical model, they can actually touch it and see the elevation changes and how it works and how the valley is there. I guess it has an application sort of embedded into itself, which is really interesting that you mentioned it. And unfortunately, we didn't mention it when we were working on it. But yeah, it's.
David?
David back in.
Hello, yeah. Just a couple quick ones. Have you published the work on using your system for education and all the results you got from working with high schools?
Yeah.
Kids, is that published?
Yeah, that one is published. I can share the Google Scholar link to that. Pretty much. Actually, what all the projects that I presented today are already published. The physical curved model is published. Landscape model is published. We have a survey, physical visualizations, and then rendering physical visualizations. That educational work is published in the Journal of Geography, and I will just find it and share the link with you. And also the work for the Inuit is also published in IEEE, Computer Graphics and Applications. Geospatial Physicalizations in Geography Education, that's the title. And I guess I can share is there a chat somewhere here? Yeah,
Yes.
chat.
Next to the share screen, yes.
Yeah. I just shared the link.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
And how does this, all of this great research that you've done, how does that like feed into your job at the architect at Kirkor?
Oh yeah. So these days, actually, I work more towards the computational design part of the story, and also my research is more focused on immersive visualizations, like the current work that we have works on using immersive visualizations towards humanitarian visualizations, and how visualizations, immersive experiences of different living spaces can work towards humanitarian visualization and towards empathy for different cultures and different countries. That is part of the research that the company is actually supporting. But other than that, it's just, I mean, one other part is the computational design related to different applications that we have. So I use the techniques that I know for digital design and digital fabrication for designing envelopes and spaces. And I also do research on immersive visualizations. One thing actually that I introduced to the firm, which was based on my previous research, was using what we did actually in Landscaper, but without 3D printing part of that. So being able to get different context and different models that we need as a starting point for our design in different projects. This was also something that was actually a direct result of my research into the firm.
have sort of
Thank you.
a two-part question. I guess in terms of the climate data visualization work that you've done, do you have any projects that you're interested in the climate space for physicalization, or that you're currently working on outside of the ones you mentioned? And do you feel like there are cities or towns or communities that are interested in that specific kind of work for their communities?
That's a very good question. I have forgotten the exact title of that research, but it was an environmental sorry, a temperature visualization, a physicalization, which was actually space, a real space that people could go there and explore what was happening. I can find that, and if I can send emails later, I can send it through the Atlas mailing list. Probably that you can receive it from there. That was a very good example of showing environmental data and temperature, stuff like that. We have also covered that in our survey paper. I can share the link of the survey paper with you. It is mentioned there, but I don't remember. Unfortunately, I don't remember the title. For municipalities and cities that are interested in that, I remember when I was in Calgary, we had many talks with the city of Calgary to make many different scenarios and physicalizations like this. In general, I guess this is something that many municipalities show interest, or some science museums, stuff like that. But I personally never had the chance to get involved into those applications. After my PhD, I just went for this postdoc experience, and then coming back to the architectural firm. So that was unfortunately something that I didn't have a chance to explore. But I remember city of Calgary, and in the city of Calgary, there's a TELUS museum, science museum. They were also interested in doing many different applications with this physical version of digital Earth. But yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately, I personally couldn't be involved in those. I guess I searched the link to the data to physicalization, a survey of the physical rendering process. We have covered many examples related to environmental physicalizations in that paper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, that was wonderful. I think I would love to experience the space. And I
Yeah.
think the interesting part is that once you print it physically, you can print more than just one layer, right? So as you move around, then depends on the part that's projected. So I think that's beyond just 2D, which is intriguing. And so if I'm a little person and going out there and I see myself on the mirror, I don't know, it's just the revelation when you see how the globe or how the map was unfolded, it's always like shocked me, like, huh, what? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting. Hopefully we will find the funding for that, and one day we will be able to build it. Maybe one municipality will support that work, and we can build it.
Or being able to, instead of 3D printing the whole thing, what if you can figure out like what the shape would be on the grid and have everybody all fill it in?
Yeah.
So it'd be a larger project that everybody fill it in, but not just trying to print it, whatever, and then could be interesting.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. Sure. Yeah.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm seduced by the image. But thank you again. Thank you, Sam, for giving us a talk.
So much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much for coming to the presentation, and thanks for the great questions. You have a great rest of your day.